and welcome to Days of Roar, a Detroit Tigers podcast brought to you by the Detroit Free Press. I'm your host, Tigers beat writer Evan Petzold, and this week, once again, I'm joined by Chris Brown from Tigers Minor League Report. It was the 8th week in a row last week. Now it's the 9th week in a row this week, and I'm guessing it'll be the 10th week in a row next week. Chris, thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me. This is a full quarter of school, I guess.
We've got a long show. We've got a lot to get into. Let's jump right into it. It was a 1-2 record for the Tigers this past week, all against the Seattle Mariners in the American League Division Series, part of the MLB postseason. The Tigers lost Game 3 and won Game 4, both games at Comerica Park. Then they lost the winner-take-all Game 5 at T-Mobile Park. Both Game 3 and Game 4 ended up being blowouts. The Tigers lost 8-4 in Game 3, and then the Tigers won 9-3 in Game 4. The winner-take-all Game 5 was a classic, but the Tigers lost and were eliminated from the 2025 postseason. So the season is over, and we are going to spend a lot of time talking about Game 5. But before we do that, I want to at least touch on Games 3 and 4. In Game 3, the Tigers lost 8-4 to the Mariners at Comerica Park. Jack Flaherty allowed 4 runs, 3 earned runs on 4 hits and 3 walks with 6 strikeouts across 3 1/3 innings. Not good enough from your number 2 starter. The Tigers were down 8-1 going into the bottom of the 9th inning. Then they scored 3 runs. It was a blowout. And the Tigers went with Jack Flaherty over Casey Mize as their Game 3 starter because they determined Flaherty was the better pitcher. And in this case, he was the bad version of Jack Flaherty, so that was really disappointing. The walks were such a problem for Flaherty, not only during the regular season, but man, in the postseason too. In the playoffs, it was 8 walks and 12 strikeouts over 10 innings. That's just not good enough, especially from your number 2 starter. And then in Game 4, the Tigers won 9-3 against the Mariners at Comerica Park. It was a must-win situation, and the Tigers won. Casey Mize, I thought, was pretty good. 1 run on 2 hits and 2 walks with 6 strikeouts across 3 innings. Pulled after 3 innings. The Tigers ended up relying on Kyle Finnegan for 2 innings and Troy Melton for 3 innings. Finnegan allowed 1 run. Melton did not allow any runs. When Finnegan allowed his run, the Mariners took a 3-0 lead in the 5th inning, and that put the Mariners just 15 outs away from advancing to the ALCS. But sure enough, the gritty Tigers, they come out of nowhere. They score 3 runs in the 5th inning and 4 runs in the 6th inning. That gives them a 7-3 lead after 6 innings. Tigers had some really big hits off the Mariners bullpen. We saw 3 hits in a row in the 5th inning to tie the game. Double from Dylan Dingler, double from Jahmai Jones, single from Javier Baez. And then Riley Green put the Tigers ahead 4-3. With a solo home run in the 6th inning, and it only kept going from there. So we saw like Game 3 of the AL wildcard, Game 4 of the ALDS. Those were the only games where the Tigers had like an inning or 2 innings where they looked like a competent offense. But even after that, right? Like the Tigers, they come out of Game 4 with a win. I had a ton of confidence in them going into Game 5 of the ALDS for one reason. Tigers had Tarik Skubal.
Yeah, and he was about as good as you could ask for. I think that's the kind of the one takeaway from all this. And you mentioned Flaherty wasn't at his best, and Finnegan had some issues in the series. I think he gave up a bunch of hits, but their pitching was really strong for most of the series. It was really good, and you've seen what the Mariners are doing to Toronto right now. They've really just kind of bombed on them, and so you have to be kind of impressed by the way the Tigers pitched. But yeah, you felt like maybe the offense had woken up, and for the first half of Game 4, boy, that was about as sad and morose as you'll see a stadium. And then they just exploded. And that was the kind of moment you've been waiting for. And you thought, hey, maybe they can carry that with them to Seattle. But Seattle's got pretty good pitching too. And that's how you end up with a 15-inning game.
Yeah, and even going into Game 5, like you had Tarik Skubal, the Mariners, they had won all 3 of the games Tarik Skubal had started previously. Twice in the regular season, once in the postseason. I figured that there was no way the Mariners would beat the Skubal-led Tigers 4 times in 4 chances in the same year. And I was wrong about that. And now here we are, and the Tigers are eliminated. And you look at the ALCS, and it's the Seattle Mariners and the Toronto Blue Jays. In the NLCS, it's the Los Angeles Dodgers and the Milwaukee Brewers. Who advances to the World Series? It's not going to be the Tigers. My prediction going into the ALCS would have been the Toronto Blue Jays, just considering the way that they swung the bat against the New York Yankees to advance out of the ALDS and get into the ALCS. But what we've seen now, the Seattle Mariners have a 2-0 lead in the best of 7 ALCS, and I'm pretty confident the Mariners can win 2 of the final 5 games in that series, which would then send them to the World Series. So I'm thinking Mariners out of the ALCS, and then I think the Dodgers are going to beat the Brewers in the NLCS because the Dodgers are the Dodgers. So right now I'm predicting Seattle Mariners and Los Angeles Dodgers in the World Series. What are your thoughts on who may be advancing and how much of a bummer is that the Tigers were so close to getting to that next step and just weren't able to get it done?
Yeah, I mean, I was with you. I thought Toronto was going to kind of steamroll through this, and it's hard to pick against the Dodgers, unfortunately. It would be really cool for the Brewers to get the World Series. It would be fun to have a Brewers-Mariners World Series just because neither of them have won. The Mariners have never even been there. So that's got to be awesome for them if they can make it. But yeah, incredibly frustrating. And part of it is whenever this sort of things happen, I always feel bad about these kind of iconic plays that get forgotten because you don't win the game. Like last year, it was Zach McKinstry hitting an opposite field home run in I think game 4 against Cleveland. And then they ended up not winning. And Kerry Carpenter's home run off the guy specifically brought in to get him out. And Carpenter just demolishes it. It was such a huge moment in the game. You're like, oh my God, that's it. And they couldn't make that stick. And so it's going to kind of get lost to history, I think, because they didn't win the game. But yeah, just so many chances to get a bloop or, just do the right thing and get one run across the plate. And they just couldn't do it. And then, I'm sure the Mariners felt the same way. They had plenty of chances and they kept bouncing into double plays and they couldn't take advantage of some gifts that they got from the Tigers and from the umpires. And by that, I mean the review room. And so it was just one of those back and forth games. And it's incredibly frustrating because of all the missed opportunities. And it's tough because Hinch talked about it enough. He said, it's really hard to get here. And it's so tough to know we're here talking to the press today instead of talking about what happened in game 1 against the Blue Jays.
All right, let's get into the big 2. Question 1 of the big 2. We'll go right to game 5. What are your takeaways from game 5 of the ALDS? A 3-2 loss to the Mariners in 15 innings. Again, 15 innings is how long that game lasted. From a time standpoint, 4 hours and 58 minutes. The Mariners used 7 pitchers. The Tigers used 8 pitchers. And between both sides, total pitches, 472. Tarik Skubal started for the Tigers, 1 run on 2 hits and 0 walks with 13 strikeouts across 6 innings, throwing 99 pitches. Obviously, this is the big talking point coming out of this is because of the way everything unfolded. And you're right. I'm happy you gave credit to Kerry Carpenter for the home run that he hit off of the lefty, Gabe Spire. I mean, that was a massive home run in that moment. I think you got to give credit to the T-Mobile Park fans, the crowd that was there for what they did. I mean, they essentially allowed Josh Naylor to steal a base. He stole a free base. He goes from second base to third base just because that crowd noise was so loud and Tarik Skubal could not hear Gleyber Torres yelling for the ball as he went to cover second base. Josh Naylor gets a huge lead. He ends up on third and then there's a sacrifice fly and he scores. And that's the run off Tarik Skubal. So you got to give credit to the crowd. You got to give credit to Kerry Carpenter. But I think the big decision was Tarik Skubal and it was 99 pitches. 6 innings. He was flat out dominant. Apparently there was a mutual decision between AJ Hinch and Tarik Skubal that the 6th inning would be Skubal's final inning. Hinch said that they talked after the 5th inning and the final batter in the 6th was Cal Raleigh. Tarik Skubal throws 3 fastballs in a row, 99.7 miles an hour, 99.1 mile an hour, and 100.9 miles an hour. The last one at 100.9 miles an hour was a middle fastball. Raleigh swung and missed it. He just couldn't touch it. You see Tarik Skubal, he flexes, he roars, he backpedals off the mound in classic Tarik Skubal fashion, and then he didn't return for the 7th inning. Was that a mistake? At the time, the Tigers had a 2-1 lead over the Mariners. In the 7th, after Skubal exits, the Mariners tied the game 2-2 against relievers Kyle Finnegan and Tyler Holton. Kyle Finnegan had a 1-out walk, then a 2-out single, and then Tyler Holton gave up the RBI single to pinch hitter Leo Rivas. Could all of that have been avoided if Skubal had just stayed in the game? Like Tarik Skubal threw 99 pitches. Could he not have gone 115 pitches, completed the 7th inning, and gotten the Tigers to the 8th inning where it would have been even Will Vest for 2 innings maybe, or Will Vest and Kyle Finnegan, or Kyle Finnegan and Will Vest, as opposed to giving the Tigers bullpen 3 innings to cover. Maybe it would have only had to have been 2 innings to cover. I don't know. Like it just felt like that was such a huge momentum shift when Tarik Skubal comes out of the game and the Mariners capitalize. Was that a mistake, or do you think it played out the way that it was supposed to play out based on this apparent mutual decision between AJ Hinch and Tarik Skubal that they had a conversation after the 5th inning that the 6th would be the last, and then obviously Tarik doesn't come out for the 7th?
Yeah, I mean, in retrospect, it's easy to say it was a mistake, and I was kind of shocked he didn't come back out, to be honest with you. He hasn't done that all year. They've been keeping him between like 90 and 100 pitches all season. And in my mind, I was like, well, if not now, then when? But maybe he's just conditioned to go that many pitches and they had that mutual agreement. And he And he did seem like he was emptying the tank there at the end, but it was like, I think he had retired 14 straight batters or something like that. And so it was like, you sent him out there at least for another batter or two. But it was, there were some interesting hitters coming up, including Polanco, who had his number in game one. And, I think a lot of relievers would prefer to start with a clean inning. So maybe there's that. And you just rely on the rest of your staff. And I will say the one thing is even Tarik Skubal, as superhuman as he is and, best pitcher on the planet, he still has a huge third time through the order penalty which means the third time he faces batters, his ERA jumps to over 4. It's under 2 the first and second times, and it jumps to over 4. So you're kind of playing with fire a little bit. It's Tarik Skubal. You'd like to think he could go back out there and get a couple more outs, but it obviously did not work out. And the big thing, and that's kind of the ultimate takeaway from the whole game is frustration we talked about it, the frustration with Josh Naylor poking a double to left field, just sticking out the bat and then stealing third base. One of the slower runners in baseball, but obviously a very gifted base stealer because he stole 30 bases this year. He steals third, scores on a sac fly. That's the one run they got off Skubal. And I give the Mariners credit. They really made Skubal work. And, they didn't really have any answers for him. He kept striking them out, like 26 whiffs, I think he had, but they were not putting the ball in play early in counts. And that's what led to 6 innings instead of 7. So there's frustration with that, frustration with Naylor, frustration with the approach. And this is something I wanted to touch on where the Mariners threw, you said they, both teams combined to throw like 480 pitches in that game or whatever. The Mariners threw 110 sliders. It was 50% sliders. And that was the highest percentage of sliders ever in a postseason game by the pitch, in the pitch tracking era. So back to 2008. And it's frustrating that the Tigers either, I assume somebody picked up on that, like, hey, he's throwing a lot of sliders. They're all throwing a lot of sliders, but it's frustrating that they couldn't do anything about it. And if you look, games 2 and 3 were like the 4th and 5th highest slider percentage in history. So the 3 games the Mariners won, they just threw a ton of sliders and the Tigers had absolutely no answer for it. And that's frustrating from a planning standpoint, from just an execution standpoint. Like, was this a weakness they had all year long and nobody figured it out, or are the Mariners sliders just that good? So it's just a frustrating experience to see a game end 3-2 in 15 innings.
Yeah. And you talk about frustration, right? How about frustration with the offense too? Even beyond the Tarik Skubal decision, let's go into extra innings when, there were how many opportunities for the Tigers to score. Hat tip to Kerry Carpenter, 4 for 5, 2 walks, 1 strikeout. He was the leadoff hitter for the Tigers. But then the numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5 hitters, that's Gleyber Torres, Riley Green, Spencer Torkelson, and Colt Keith. Those players were combined 0 for 23 with 2 walks and 10 strikeouts. That is the heart of your lineup. 8th inning, Riley Green pops out with 2 runners on base. 10th inning, Spencer Torkelson flies out with 2 runners on base. Colt Keith strikes out with 2 runners on base. 12th inning, Gleyber Torres flies out with the bases loaded. I mean, those were all scoring opportunities for the best players on your roster. I'm not expecting Zach McKinstry, Dylan Dingler, Parker Meadows, or Javier Baez to come through in the big moments. I'm expecting Kerry Carpenter, Gleyber Torres, Riley Green, Spencer Torkelson, and Colt Keith to come through. And only Carpenter did something in Game 5 of the ALDS. Nobody else from the heart of the lineup did anything to help him. So obviously, didn't let Skubal surpassed 100 pitches, didn't have a deep enough bullpen, had too many strikeouts from the offense. Like, those were all issues that plagued the Tigers in the second half of the regular season, especially the bullpen depth and the strikeout issues. So I'm not surprised that those things are ultimately what ended their postseason run. You talk about the breaking balls. The Tigers, their approach has been hunting fastballs, right? Hunting fastballs in certain spots of the zone where they can do damage, and the Mariners just beat them. They just flipped and spin over and over and over and over again. And if you've got Spencer Torkelson going to the plate saying like, yeah, I'm always on the fastball and I'm never getting off the fastball and I'm always on it. Well, what if you don't see a fastball? And I'm like, you have to get a hit. You have to get a hit. If they're spinning over and over again, if they're landing spin in the zone or even dropping it below the zone, but if you're in a big moment and you need to get a hit, you're going to have to swing the bat. So you can't just wait for the fastball. That's never going to come. So I do think it was an impressive strategy by the Mariners, clearly exposed some things that the Tigers offense struggles with, and we saw exactly what happened. So yeah, a lot of frustration with the Skubal decision. Obviously, the bullpen, it just wasn't deep enough, and that showed not only in that game, but that it showed down the stretch, and bullpen was wearing thin. How many times did they go to Troy Melton, right? You go to Troy Melton as a starter, as a reliever, then again as a reliever. Like, how many times were they leaning on this rookie 24-year-old right-hander who was in Double-A to start the year? I think that tells you everything you need to know about where the Tigers bullpen was at. And then Kyle Finnegan, the guy they trusted the most, their one positive addition at the trade deadline, even he wasn't able to come up with some big pitches when he needed to. So yeah, a lot of reasons to be disappointed. And then you lose for the second season in a row in Game 5 of the ALDS. And there's no guarantee the Tigers get back there in 2026. I want to make that super clear, especially if you don't have Tarik Skubal on your roster. Like, it's hard to get to the postseason. It's hard to get to Game 5 of the ALDS. You go look at both the Tigers and the Astros, finished with an 87-75 record in the 2025 season. And if the Tigers had lost one more game to the Astros in the head-to-head matchup, then it would have been the Astros, not the Tigers, getting into the postseason. Like, what happens if the Tigers miss the playoffs next year? Like, there's no guarantee. And that's all I'm saying. And I remember what Lions coach, and this is a football reference, but Lions coach Dan Campbell, after the Lions lost the NFC Championship game against the 49ers in January of 2024, he said, quote, "This may have been our only shot," end quote. And I think it's not easy to get as far as the Tigers made it in 2025. So we can't just count on them getting back to the ALDS again in 2026. And I certainly hope the Tigers front office isn't just banking on a return to the ALDS just because they've been there each of the past two seasons. It's just not that easy. It is hard to do. And a lot of things have to go right for you to get to that situation. I mean, look at the Tigers. Game 3 of an AL wildcard against the Guardians. That's a toss-up. That game could have gone either way. Tigers could have been knocked out in the wildcard, but there are no guarantees of getting back to the ALDS again. So I hope they're not banking on it once again, because it's just not that easy.
Yes, it's hard to make the playoffs. And that's one of I think you look back and say, okay, it was a good season because they made the playoffs for the second straight year, but it wasn't a great season. But I think you have to go a little farther for it to be great. And it ultimately a disappointing season. Fans had higher expectations because the Tigers were playing to higher expectations for the first 5 months of the year. And it all kind of came crashing down. It was a trip back to reality. And yeah, you would hope that they know that they need to do more to bolster this team, to prevent some of the things that happened this year. At the same time, it is still a relatively young team. At least the offensive core is relatively young. And I've seen a lot of people talk about kind of wanting to blow it up or trade some of these guys. And maybe you trade one or two of them, but most of these guys are 27 and younger. Like, they're going to continue to get better. Some will have good years. Some will have down years. That's what happens with young players. But there's a chance that they all kind of catch lightning in a bottle in the same year and you have a really good offense. It's just, you need a little bit more veteran leadership, I think. Gleyber Torres was great at playing hurt, evidently. We found out later. And one more bat like that would have done wonders, I think.
Question 2 of the big two, and this is a really big question. Should the Tigers trade Tarik Skubal in the 2025-26 offseason? Now, to set the table, Tarik Skubal becomes a free agent after the 2026 season. He is projected to earn between $15 and $20 million in his third and final year of salary arbitration. So I would expect his 2026 salary to be somewhere around 17 to 18 million. Then he will hit free agency after the 2026 season. But the Tigers need to make a decision here. Do you trade Tarik Skubal now, or do you hold on to him and maybe let him walk without getting anything for him? And that's the decision they have to make. What's the right choice?
Geez, I think you hold on to Skubal. I mean, everybody, there's a price for everyone, right? If you get a Godfather deal, then I suppose you could take it. But we talked about it, how close they've gotten these last 2 years. I think they kind of owe it to the team and to these players and to Skubal and to the town to go for it at least once more with Skubal. You've got the best pitcher on the planet. That's pretty hard to come by. The Tigers have had that a couple times in the last 25 years, but before that, it wasn't very common. So yeah, I mean, and what you'll get in return, I don't think is going to be all that great. As much as people think that Skubal is a tremendous player, but you mentioned he's going to be making a fair amount of money. So that's going to take some teams out of it right away. And you need to have the right prospect capital, if you will. And I think you don't do it unless you are getting somebody who's already in the majors, basically a young major league starting pitcher who's had some success in the big leagues and has upside to be maybe not a number one, Skubal, but number 2, number 3 starter. Someone like Nolan McLean from the Mets or Cam Schlittler from the Yankees who has come up and they've been successful. But you need somebody like that and prospects, I think, to make it worth it. And I don't picture those teams doing that. And I don't picture the Tigers trading Skubal really, as much as it's going to come up a lot in the offseason. It'll be constant topics. They'll be talking about it on the MLB network every week. But you just, like I said, you can look at some similar trades in the past. Corbin Burns had won a Cy Young with the Brewers and was traded to the Orioles, and they got DL Hall and Joey Ortiz. DL Hall was a highly touted pitching prospect. He was top 100 prospects, and he's now kind of a middle reliever who I don't even think is on their playoff roster. And Joey Ortiz is a very good defensive third baseman, but he was one of the worst hitters in baseball this year. It's not And the Brewers are doing just fine, right? That's one of the amazing things about the Brewers is they lost a Cy Young level pitcher. And we're just like, whatever. But so you're not necessarily going to get these star talents in return. And one of the other ones I found was going back to like 2012 when the Mets were able to trade an aging R.A. Dickey to Toronto. And what they got was, it was a part of a package deal. They got Travis d'Arnaud, the catcher, and they got Noah Syndergaard. But they were both at lower levels. And so you can kind of get higher upside if you get guys at lower levels. And I don't picture the Tigers taking that kind of step back. You're not going to go trade for 3 guys in A-ball for Tarik Skubal. And then beyond that, all the other kind of similar deals were either like Zach Greinke was traded with 2 years left, which is not the same. And then Cliff Lee and CC Sabathia were both traded at the deadline. So I guess that's the one sort of nightmare scenario would be maybe the Tigers get out to a terrible start and they're just not going to make the playoffs. And you're like, well, do we trade Skubal at the deadline? And then you're getting less and it just, everything goes wrong. But I think you got to run it back with Skubal and just hope that, we've seen he was outstanding in the playoffs, just spectacular. And that's the guy you can win a World Series with if you give him a little bit more support. And I think they need to spend this offseason trying to find that support.
So I think there are actually nightmare scenarios beyond the one that you just mentioned, and I'll get to those. But the Tigers need Tarik Skubal to make a World Series run in 2026. So are you willing to sacrifice your best chance to win the World Series in 2026 for the chance at a better future in 2027 and beyond? Like, that's the trade, isn't it? Don't trade Tarik Skubal. Best chance to win the World Series in 2026, less talent in your organization in 2027 and beyond. Trade Tarik Skubal, worst chance to win the World Series in 2026, more talent in your organization in 2027 and beyond. Now, you mentioned the Milwaukee Brewers. You're spot on. They traded their ace, Corbin Burnes, to the Orioles. That was February of 2024. At the time, Corbin Burnes had 1 year remaining before free agency, so it's the same timeline as Skubal, even though Skubal is a significantly better pitcher than Corbin Burnes. I mean, Tarik Skubal is about to win the Cy Young in back-to-back years. He's been the most dominant pitcher in baseball for the last 3 years. And you're right, DL Hall and Joey Ortiz, but also a competitive balance round A draft pick, which turned out to be the number 34 overall pick used to select Tennessee first baseman Blake Burke. A Tarik Skubal trade would net the Tigers more than that. But here's what I think the Tigers are probably looking at. The Brewers traded Corbin Burnes. The Brewers added controllable talent to the organization. The Brewers won the NL Central without Corbin Burnes. Brewers general manager Matt Arnold won Executive of the Year as voted on by his peers that year. So if I told you right now, let's play the hypothetical game, you and me. If I told you the Tigers could trade Tarik Skubal, add multiple prospects to the organization, win the AL Central in 2026 without Skubal, would you trade Tarik Skubal?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, anytime you can get a guaranteed division, I mean, such a thing doesn't exist, but hypothetically, then yeah, I think you could do that because you're not going to re-sign him as much as, you want to touch on that?
Oh, no, you're not going to re-sign him. Spot on. I mean, he's going to free agency. So let's say you're Scott Harris. And if I told you all of those things would happen, trade Tarik Skubal, add multiple prospects, win the AL Central in 2026 without Tarik Skubal, and on top of that, Scott Harris, you will win Executive of the Year as voted on by your peers. Would you, Scott Harris, trade Tarik Skubal?
Well,
I think it's easy to see why the Tigers could be incentivized to trade Tarik Skubal. And then you look at some of the nightmare scenarios. What if he gets injured in 2026? Then you can't trade him at all, and you can't put him on the mound. What if your team isn't as good as you expected in 2026? Well, then you trade him at the deadline. You don't get as much for him. Also, what if your team is good, but not good enough to win the World Series? What if it's a repeat scenario where you make it to the ALDS, you get to Game 5, and you lose? Or you get to the ALCS, and you lose. And you're not able to win the World Series. And then Tarik Skubal walks and you have nothing to show for it. You don't have a championship to show for it. You don't have any prospects to show for it. You got nothing to show for the value of Tarik. I mean, this is what the game of baseball is, a game of value. So to let Tarik Skubal walk and have nothing to show for his value, that would be really disappointing. So I'm not saying they're going to trade him for sure or they're not going to trade him. I think they very well could hold on to him and try to make another run, but you got to go for it. If you're going to keep him, you got to go for it. You really got to go for it. And that's why I look at this rotation, right? The rotation with Tarik Skubal. You got Tarik Skubal, Reese Olson, Jack Flaherty, Casey Mize, Troy Melton. Without Tarik Skubal, you're looking at Reese Olson, Jack Flaherty, Casey Mize, Troy Melton, Jose Urquidy. You're not getting Jackson Joe back. He's coming back from Tommy John surgery. It's going to be a while for him. So maybe you go and you target a Dylan Cease in free agency, either to replace Tarik Skubal if you're going to trade him or to complement Tarik Skubal if you're going to keep him. Because if you are going to keep Tarik Skubal, you need Dylan Cease. Alex Bregman, and 2 or 3 elite relievers. Like, you need to be World Series or bust at that point. And then if it doesn't work out, then you can blow it up and start all over again after 2026. You'll have 2 years left to Spencer Torkelson, 2 years left to Riley Green, 3 years left to Colt Keith, a lot of years with Scott Harris's prospects, Kevin McGonigal, Max Clark, Bryce Rayner, among others. But you can't keep Tarik Skubal and not be all in on winning the World Series. And for me, being all in, it means keeping Tarik Skubal, signing Alex Bregman, signing Dylan Cease, and adding some legit elite high leverage relievers to get the job done in the biggest moments of the game. That's just kind of where I'm at on all this. Call me crazy if you want, but I just think there are a lot of different ways to look at this, whether it's the Corbin Burns scenario or what they may do in free agency or how the rotation may look with or without Tarik Skubal. And if you're going to keep Tarik Skubal, you better be all in to win the World Series. And I don't think that the organization was there this year. And I feel like that was a missed opportunity.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think a lot of people said that this is, you made it last year. Now you got to go for it. That's what people said about the deadline, right? They should have gone for it more because you've got Skubal now and you're not going to have him. And that we just haven't seen those kind of bold, moves from Scott Harris as a president yet. We may never. He does seem to like to work on the margins. But yeah, it would seem like now or never. And to your point, if they did trade Skubal, that does take $15-20 million off the books to spend on another starter if they want to supplement that way. But I agree with you. I think they need, we could touch on this all off season basically, but they need another veteran bat, at least one, and they need a second starter who they can trust to go more than 4 innings in a postseason game, right? Like, pitching chaos seems to work, but it would be nice to not have to do it in 4 out of 5 games.
Dylan Cease and Alex Bregman, sign me up. All right, we are going to take a break. When we come back, we are going to take you into the end of season news conference from President of Baseball Operations, Scott Harris. We're back. President of Baseball Operations, Scott Harris, and manager AJ Hinch held a press conference Monday to recap the 2025 season. AJ Hinch quoted the great Marshawn Lynch saying, "I'm just here so I don't get fined." So we are going to focus primarily on Scott Harris here. First and foremost, I thought Scott Harris did an excellent job in this post-mortem press conference. I thought he did a good job of balancing the good and the bad. What happened in August, September, and October, it's inexcusable. He was the first to admit that. But the reality is the Tigers were the best team in baseball in the first half of the season. He also admitted that. So we can't act like the first half of the season didn't exist because of what happened in the second half of the season. And honestly, I think the Tigers are in a rough spot moving forward, and there aren't a lot of concrete answers. I think that's why they're in kind of an identity crisis right now. Like, are you the first half Tigers or the second half Tigers? And if you're somewhere in between, then are you closer to the first half Tigers or closer to the second half Tigers? Those are some really difficult questions that I don't think the Tigers have the answers to. And I'm not sure they will until the 2026 season, which makes this very fascinating. But the point is, I thought Scott Harris did a good job considering the negativity that surrounds the Tigers right now because of the way things ended, blowing the AL Central in historic fashion, barely winning the AL Wildcard Series, and then losing in the ALDS for the second year in a row. Scott Harris and AJ Hinch, they met with reporters for an hour. Scott Harris answered all the questions. He did his job, and I thought he did it well, and I have a lot of respect for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think he made a very smart decision to come out immediately and touch on all the stuff that fans were complaining about and upset about, and acknowledge that he saw it too. He saw the kind of disintegration of their good approach at the plate and the swing and miss, and he talked about how they need more guys who can put the ball in play, more guys who can go the opposite way. Kind of all these things that old school hitting stuff that a lot of people on Twitter like to talk about. But it's true. They had a lot of opportunities to score more runs if they had just done some basic fundamental stuff, and they couldn't get it done. And he acknowledged that. And I think that was huge. The worst thing you can do as any kind of executive is to tell the people that what they're seeing isn't actually happening. And he acknowledged that, and he said there's a lot of work to be done. But I do think, to your point, he did leave some room to say, hey, this still was a good season. He wasn't overly, sunny about it, but he was proud of the guys, and he talked about players working through a lot of things and persevering. And I don't know, you get the sense that he and AJ Hinch actually do have a solid working relationship, which is good to see, right? Like, you hear some rumors and things like that maybe they don't necessarily always get along, and that's going to be the way it is with anybody in high ranking positions. But they seem to be kind of simpatico in that way, and I thought it was a good like you said, a good postmortem press conference, and they acknowledged there's a lot of work to be done.
So we're going to get into what Scott Harris said, and our magical producer, Robin Chan, is going to play the audio before we react to each topic. Let's start with the opening statement, and buckle up. This lasted like 10 minutes.
Before I get into questions, I just want to talk generally about a few thoughts that are rattling in my head and that have been for the last few days. I think first and foremost, like I wish we weren't here right now. I wish we were in Toronto preparing for game 2 of the ALCS. We were really close to being in Toronto right now, but we're not. We didn't achieve our ultimate goal of winning the World Series, and now we're here at a press conference. And I think anytime you get to the playoffs and you fail to win a World Series, it leaves a really bitter taste in your mouth. I very much feel that. I've felt it all weekend. I know AJ feels it. I know a bunch of our players and coaches feel that. And I expect us to feel that for a while. I also expect that bitter taste in our mouths to drive us this offseason, to drive our players individually to make gains, and to drive us as a group to make sure that we can build off of some of the good things that happened this year. I think the other thing that really sticks in my head is this season was full of emotional swings, really big emotional swings. There were times when this team looked like it was rolling, when we were executing at a really high level in all phases of the game, when we were putting a ton of pressure on opposing starters in the first inning, driving up pitch counts, holding the zone, coming through in big spots, and playing a brand of baseball that could beat opposing teams in a number of ways. There were also times this year where we were fighting through adversity. We were not holding the zone. We were not executing in big spots. We were not playing clean and consistent baseball in all phases of the game. And we were struggling to recapture the momentum that really drove this team for the first 5 months. Those emotional swings combined with the passion with which our fans follow and support this team created some really high highs and some really low lows. I felt those highs and I felt those lows, and I was right there with our fans in all of those moments. In some ways, it felt like this season was multiple seasons in one, multiple very different seasons in one. And we gotta take a hard look at all of it. We got to take all the good and we got to take all the bad, and we got to learn from all of it. However, I think in my job, it is really important for me to step back and look at the entire season. It's really important for me to look at it from a 30,000-foot view. And I think when you do that, it is hard to characterize this season as anything other than another big step forward for an organization that's come a really long way in a short period of time. Among things that we did this year, we won more games than we did last year. We had 6 All-Stars, the most in all of baseball. We got to the postseason 2 consecutive years for the 5th time in over 100 years in this organization. We won another postseason series, and we earned our 8th postseason win in 2 years. I think that's the 3rd most in all of baseball. We had many players on our big league team that took a big step forward. We entered the season with the number 1 overall farm system, and many of our most important prospects had dominant seasons on their way to some of them reaching the postseason or reaching the big leagues in 2026. And I think the most important thing when I reflect on the entire season is we went a calendar year from late August to late August with the most major league wins of any organization in baseball. And we finished the 2025 season with the best overall organizational record of any organization in the sport. Those are really big deals. Those are really hard to do. Our players and our coaches in that clubhouse deserve a ton of credit for all that stuff. I'm really proud of them for all that stuff. That's really hard to do, and it's especially impressive for a young group that's still entering their prime right now. So we got a lot to be proud of from this season. Now, I understand here, like the arc of our season is not doing us any favors here. Anytime you have 5 dominant months and then you perform as poorly as we did in September, it raises questions. I'm sure you guys are going to ask me a lot of those questions. I deserve to get those questions, and we deserve the negative narratives that are swirling around this team. However, I think it is important to have some perspective here. Like if we had sequenced our season differently, but got to the same place. Like, by way of example, if we had stumbled out of the gate and had a really tough April and then posted 5 dominant months from May through September, I think the mood around this team is very different. I think the narratives around this team are very different. Even if we had gotten to the same place, how we got to this place, I think is important. And I think that's driving a lot of the conversation around this team right now. And we deserve that. Because anytime you sequence this season the way we did, we deserve to have these questions. And me personally, I can't be naive to what I saw in September. I can't be naive to some of the struggles that we faced in the biggest moments. I can't be naive to the fact that we got to get a whole lot better at a lot of things in this organization. We did all these things that I listed, all these achievements, which are really impressive and I'm really proud of, but we got to get a whole lot better in a lot of different areas. And some of those areas I wanted to share at the outset here, like the first thing is our approach at the plate. In the big leagues, it seemed like our approach started to deteriorate down the stretch. We posted a really high-powered offense that performed in many of the most important categories for 5 months, and then we really stumbled down the stretch. We got to figure out why. We got to understand why our approach seemed to deteriorate down the stretch, and we got to understand the adjustments that we need to make to put together an entire season of, a high-performing offense instead of just 5 months and then struggling down the stretch. I think the second area that we need to look into is contact. We need to make more contact as an organization. We need to move the baseball more in the big leagues than we are. This has been a theme from the last 2 years. I think there are a lot of players on our team right now that have some swing and miss in their games. But I think there are some things that we can do to improve upon it. I'm sure we'll talk about it today. But the time for that is now. Like, we need to start making those gains right now. We need to make sure that we have a team next year that can consistently across 6 months make enough contact to be a productive offense. I think if you go back and you look at our season, the months in which we made more contact, we were one of the best offenses in baseball. If you take a look at June, which was the lowest strikeout rate month that we had this season, we also had the best offense in baseball. When this group does move the ball, we can do a lot of damage. We can score a lot of runs. We got to find a way to be able to do that more consistently. And there's some ways that we have already talked about that we're working on immediately. I think the third thing that we need to get a lot better at is we need to improve our health and consistency on the mound. I think if you go back and look at this season, we had a ton of injuries. Out of the gate, we had a ton of injuries, and we had a steady stream of injuries throughout the entire season. It affected us on both sides of the ball, but I think it affected us more on the pitching side. I think some of the injuries that we had in the big leagues and the minor leagues started to thin out our depth, and we weren't able to produce that second wave of pitching this year in August and September that we needed to supplement this team. We did it last year. We added some really important arms that helped us, go 31-11 down the stretch. We weren't able to do that, and I think the injuries and the setbacks that we faced in both the big leagues and the minor leagues were a significant contributing factor to the struggles that we faced down the stretch. So we got to find a way as an organization to make some adjustments to keep our players healthier and performing better deeper into the season, because the expectations have changed around here. We're trying to play a 7-month season instead of a 6-month season, and we need to make those changes to help make sure that we have reinforcements in August and September that can help us. And I think the last one is something I've talked about a lot, but we got to continue to get better. We have to continue to get better at breaking young players into the big leagues. I've talked about it since the day I got here, and I've been very outspoken about trying to make sure that the environment that Colt Keith and Parker Meadows jump into is better than the environment that Riley Green and Spencer Torkelson jumped into. And then the environment that Dylan Dingler jumped into is better than the environment that Colt Keith and Parker Meadows jumped into. We got to keep making progress there, because it's too important to our future. We've talked a lot about our last 3 drafts. We've talked a lot about some of the players coming through the minor leagues. Those guys are really close. A lot of them are going to help us next year, and we got to make sure that the environment that they're jumping into is going to get the absolute most out of them. And that work starts right now. We got to prepare the environment for these guys to be able to jump on this team as soon as next year and make this team better, not struggle in the first 2, 3, 4 months to adjust to big league pitching and to help this team get better. It's too important to our future, and it's something that we need to take very seriously as soon as today. So some areas, happy to take any of your questions. AJ's here to take the questions from the man who received.
So that was the opening statement from Scott Harris. What are some of your initial thoughts? I mean, when I look at it, I say, okay, one more games in 2025 than 2024. Well, it was a one win difference. If we hadn't stumbled out of the gate and had a tough April and then posted the 5 dominant months, like if the season was reversed and it wasn't this bad finish, it was a bad start and then a really strong finish, would the narrative have been different? I'm not so sure when you look at the fact that this team lost in the ALDS in back-to-back seasons, and that's ultimately what defines your season. Like, had the Tigers gone and made it to the ALCS, had they made it to the World Series, like nobody would have been talking about their historic AL Central collapse. So I think it maybe hinges more on the fact that they lost ALDS back-to-back years as opposed to the tough finish. Yes, the tough finish plays into the narrative, but at the same time, like the end result of your season is how your season ends. And the Tigers season, it ended in the ALDS for the second year in a row. I also thought like the point of going from August 2024 to August 2025 and having the best record in baseball, an accomplishment, no doubt. I mean, that was one of the reasons why I went around the room at the All-Star game and I talked to a bunch of different players from other teams. And I said, hey, what's impressing you about what the Tigers are doing? And they went pretty in depth as to what the Tigers had done over the past 162 games from August 2024 to August 2025. And a lot of players around the league, a lot of stars around the league were very impressed. But again, there are no banners that get hung for being the best from August 2024 to August 2025. And in the farm system ranking number 1, like, does anybody actually care about that anymore? And I'm not trying to diss you, Chris, because you are Tigers minor league report. But at the same time, like, that mattered when this big league team sucked. But there are no banners for having the number 1 farm system. So yes, it does matter. Yes, it matters, people. But at the same time, it's not the ultimate prize. You don't hang a banner for being the number 1 farm system. I loved what he said about the approach at the plate, about the fact that the approaches deteriorated down the stretch. They need to understand that and also address that. Making more contact, that's an area that needs to improve. We'll get into, both of those topics a little bit more, but I like that he addressed that right out front. And then, yeah, the injuries, of course, had an impact. Reese Olson was limited to 13 starts. Jackson Jobe was limited to 10 starts. Of course, that's going to impact you as a team, but all teams have injuries and the best teams know how to pivot. And that's kind of my takeaway from the injury front, especially to the pitchers. I don't know. What are some of your thoughts, Chris, on kind of what Scott had to say to open things up?
Yeah, I mean, I think he was searching for things to be positive about, for sure. And he found some. Part of that is the audience isn't just the fans. There's also the players hear this stuff too. And you don't want to just come out and say, yeah, we're terrible. But he came out, he said they needed to be better. He talked about specifically where they needed better. I agree with you. I love following the minors. I do it. I write about it, do podcasts about it. I don't think he just does himself any favors talking about the minor league system. I think the average fan doesn't care that much about farm rankings or the fact that they had the best winning percentages in the organization. I think that does matter in some regards, but I don't think he necessarily needs to talk about that unless he's talking to us at Tigers Minor League Report. But it's, like you said, he touched on the good, he touched on the bad. I think to your point, it doesn't really help to kind of pick out little segments and say, we were the best team from this point to this point. You were ultimately the team you were. I do agree that I think had they gotten off to a slow start, or if they just, had that bad run around the All-Star break, which they did, and then came back and were still the team they were before, I don't know if there would be this kind of dread. But they, as he said, they earned that. This was one of the most epic collapses anybody's ever seen. And, the fan dread was earned. And so they have to figure out how to get back in the good graces and maybe, do some big things this offseason.
Here's everything Scott Harris said about the July 31st trade deadline in which the Tigers acquired Chris Paddock, Charlie Morton, Kyle Finnegan, Rafael Montero, and Paul Sewald, all pitchers, with only one of those pitchers, Kyle Finnegan, becoming a positive, trusted contributor.
Scott, you mentioned the lack of the zone and hitting and also the pitching depth. Do you look back at the deadline and say, I could have done more to make sure this wouldn't happen nobody was ever suggesting trading Clark or McGonigal, without trading the top prospects to get help in those areas that you mentioned that declined?
Yeah. Do I regret not adding more performance to this team at the deadline? I don't think I've ever gone through a deadline completely satisfied with the results. It's a really difficult challenge. And, I think this deadline is another deadline when I wasn't completely satisfied with the results. However, do I regret not pulling the trigger on the deals that we had access to at the deadline? I don't. And I'll tell you why. I think I'm even more confident now than I was then that the deals that we had access to that we passed on would have frustrated our fans more than not doing the deals. It's really tough in my job right now because I can't share the exact deals for obvious reasons, but I can share some details that hopefully are pretty illuminating. I would tell you that the players that were most closely connected to us via the media would have cost either a player on our postseason roster plus additional pieces or one of our top prospects plus additional pieces. In some cases, with those deals that were most closely connected to us, those players that were most closely connected to us, those players, some of them didn't perform at all down the stretch, would have been a free agent in 2 months, and would have cost a player on our postseason roster that actually performed better than the player we acquired and was controllable in the future. So think about that for a second. We could have acquired a player who was going to be a pending free agent on the day of the deadline. We probably would have gotten an A on the trade grades on the day of the deadline and probably would have gotten plenty of praise in the coverage, only to see that player not perform well down the stretch and the player we traded perform better than that player this year and be controllable in the future. I don't regret those deals at all. I actually am proud of our group for evaluating the players we had well and thinking, hey, these players are going to help us this year and in the future and get some really big outs for us in the postseason. So those are my feelings on like whether there's any sense of regret on the deals. I think, the subtext of the point I'm trying to make here is, in my job, I got to operate in actual markets. I can't get caught up in hopes and wishes or theoretical markets. If there are players that, anyone in this room thinks that we had access to for a reasonable return and we should have pulled the trigger on, like, you should criticize me. I deserve that criticism and I should learn from that criticism. But criticizing us for not acquiring a top of the rotation starter or a controllable middle of the order bat when none were moved at the deadline, I don't think is fair or constructive.
Scott, just to build on that question with
Sure.
the trade deadline, were there pieces that maybe weren't floated by the media that you feel like you guys could have went out and acquired, or were you unable to, make those kind of deals?
We chased a lot of players that were connected to us in the media. We got close on some players. We didn't get close on other deals. I think what's important is if you look at how it all played out, like, we went into the market thinking like, hey, we think the relief market's pretty deep here at the deadline, and we think the starter market is really shallow. Like, we think it's really thin. And I think that largely played out. I think those evaluations aged pretty well. I also think we dipped into the relief market at the deadline, and we acquired the second best performing back-end reliever acquired by any contender in Finnegan. We also added another useful arm in Rafael Montero, and we added Troy Melton to the back end of our rotation. I think those three additions stabilized the back of our bullpen and got some really big outs for us. I think in the starter market, going into the deadline, we didn't think that the starters that we had access to would have started playoff games for us. We didn't think they were better than our front four of, at the time, was Reese, Tarik, Jack, and Casey in no particular order. So going into it, both as a reflection of our evaluation of the starters available and the starting pitching that we had, we didn't think that the players that we could have acquired in the rotation would have made a big impact for us in the postseason. So we didn't think it was in the best interest of the organization to pay steep prospect costs or take a player off our postseason roster to get a starter that we didn't think was going to factor in much into the postseason. Now, when Reese went down, it did change our starting pitching need, but it didn't change the market. And I think if you follow the starters that moved, I think there was only one starter that posted a sub-4 ERA after the deadline that got moved at the deadline. So I do actually think our evaluations of those starters were right. Do I wish that we had added more productive innings to our rotation in the deals we did? Absolutely. I definitely do. I thought Paddock and Morton performed, gave us a boost right away. Paddock had a really good start against the D-backs. Morton pitched really well in a tough environment in Philly, but they were struggled to be able to reproduce that performance down the stretch. And we needed more performance in our rotation, and we weren't able to do that. And that's on me. I should have done better in the rotation. But I do think it is a reflection on the actual markets that existed. And I'm proud of the efforts that our staff did.
Hey, Scott, you were talking about the deadline, and you said every deadline you're probably a little dissatisfied. You talked about the high asking price. But considering how September looked and what AJ was just talking about, one pitch, one inning, one runaway, how do you not feel like it was a missed opportunity? I know you talk about the high asking prices, but this team hasn't won a World Series in 41 years. You were 9 games up. Like, how was the answer Paddock and Morton? And maybe you say, we got to give up a little more to get somebody that can actually help us win now instead of the future.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, when we acquired Paddock and Morton, the goal wasn't for them to play big roles for us in the postseason. So we got to the postseason. We lined up our pitching. We thought we were going to be dangerous once we lined up our pitching, and we were. We pitched really well in the postseason. I think we had a sub-3 ERA. Over the course of the whole postseason, we faced a really high-powered offense in Seattle, and we pitched them really tough. And I think the aggregate numbers suggest, hey, we pitched really well in the postseason. So I'm pretty sure the pitching wasn't necessarily like the primary issue as to why we're not in Toronto right now. I think the offensive performance we had down the stretch is a fair question on could we have done more. I think the question that I often have found myself reflecting on is like, should we have added a bat at the deadline? I think that's a very common question that we hear from different people. I run into people on the street, and I think as I reflect on that decision, I think it's important for us to remind ourselves of where we were at when we were making those decisions. And I think there's a couple of things that are really important here. Like in July, we just had 4 position players in the All-Star game. On August 31st, our offense scored the 8th most runs of any team in baseball across 5 months. So we had the 8th best offense in baseball across 5 months. And in order to add a bat, we would have had to displace a high-performing player who had helped us achieve like a top 8 offense at that point. And maybe we should have. Maybe that is a fair question. I think the more pressing and fundamental question is, how does a top 8 offense for 5 months become a bottom 8 offense in September? That's the question that really keeps me up at night. I think it's a function of our approach changes. It's a function of the contact. It's a function of the environments. That's something that we're going to spend a lot of time digging on because, that's the question that really stood in the way of us winning the World Series, in my opinion. I think if we had continued to produce at a really high level while continuing to pitch at a really high level and play the clean, consistent baseball that drove us to 25 games over 500 at the end of August, I think that's a team that we could really reasonably expect to be playing in Toronto right now with a great chance to win the World Series. So that's the thing I'm going to really obsess over this offseason. I understand the question. I think it's a totally fair question. But I think the more fundamental question is what changed with our offense going from the first 5 months to the last month? And is that a blip in the radar or is that predictive of the future? We got to get to the bottom of that question.
Just a quick follow-up. Understanding, obviously you were really happy where you were, but isn't that the job to maybe build a little support, understanding that things could dip offensively like they did?
Yeah, I mean, I think so that's the job. But the question, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, is if I could go back and do it over again, would I focus on adding a bat? I think if I could go back and do it all over again, I would focus on getting ahead of some of the changes that we may or may not have been able to see in August that created the September of underperformance and challenges. I think that's the pressing question. Maybe the answer is both. Maybe we should have added a bat and we should have gotten ahead of some of the changes that our young hitters faced in difficult environments against better pitching in September and October. So those are the questions that are rattling around my head, and those are the questions that I'm going to obsess over and try to get answers to so that we can fix it for next year.
There's a lot to unpack there. Obviously, we know what the Tigers did at the trade deadline, and they went out and they got Charlie Morton, Chris Paddock, Kyle Finnegan, Rafael Montero, Paul Sewald, Kyle Finnegan shined. Everyone else failed to meet expectations. Going into the July 31st trade deadline, the Tigers did not want to part ways with any of their top 100 prospects, as listed by MLB Pipeline: Kevin McGonigal, Max Clark, Bryce Rayner, Jose Briseño, Thyron Lorenzo. However, when you look at the deals that were made, a top 100 prospect wasn't required for the New York Yankees to go get David Bednar, a free agent after 2026, or for the Texas Rangers to acquire starter Merrill Kelly, a free agent after 2025, or the Seattle Mariners to acquire third baseman Eugenio Suarez, a free agent after 2025. A top 100 prospect was not required for any of those three players. Therefore, the Tigers would not have had to give up Kevin McGonigal, Max Clark, Bryce Rayner, Jose Briseño, Thyron Lorenzo to get one of those guys based on the market. So it's likely the Tigers could have acquired one of those players without giving up one of their top 100 prospects. As for how those three players performed, David Bednar, 2.19 ERA, 9 walks, 35 strikeouts across 24 and 2/3 innings in 22 games. He secured 10 saves in 13 chances. That was David Bednar for the Yankees. For the Rangers, Merrill Kelly had a 4.23 ERA, 10 walks, 46 strikeouts across 55 and 1/3 innings in 10 starts. And for the Mariners, Eugenio Suarez hit 189 with 13 home runs, 17 walks, 79 strikeouts in 53 games, registering a 682 OPS. The Tigers put all their eggs in one basket. It was pitching quantity. Remember, they took a conservative approach at the trade deadline. They prioritized quantity over quality. They went out and they got a bunch of pitchers. Only Kyle Finnegan and Rafael Montero were chosen by the Tigers for their 13-man pitching staff in the ALDS during the postseason. And then manager AJ Hinch refuses to put Montero in Game 5 of the ALDS, which lasted 15 innings and required the Tigers to use 8 pitchers. I think that tells you everything you need to know about Rafael Montero. Kyle Finnegan was the only trusted arm added at the trade deadline. And then, of course, the Tigers did not add any bats. After the trade deadline, the Tigers ranked 21st in ERA from their starters, 12th in ERA from their relievers, and 17th in WRC plus from their offense. They had a 23 and 29 record in their final 52 games after the trade deadline. Chris, what did you think about what Scott had to say? What do you think about the fact that they didn't go out there and get David Bednar, Merrill Kelly, or Eugenio Suarez at the trade deadline? Do you think it was a missed opportunity? Or do you think the Tigers maybe made the right decision by not going after Merrill Kelly or Eugenio Suarez or other potential players out there? I mean, obviously David Bednar was an outlier. He was dominant. But aside from David Bednar, who else on the trade market that was moved really produced? I think that's a fair way to look at it as well. So I think there's two sides of each coin. Now, at the same time, maybe Eugenio Suarez did not produce for the Mariners, but what's to say that the Tigers coaching staff wouldn't have been able to get more out of him? That's another way to look at it. So how do you feel about what Scott had to say about the trade deadline? And was it a missed opportunity?
Yeah, I think you have to look at it as a missed opportunity just because they didn't get a bunch of players that helped them go farther. At the same time, I do think that a lot more is made out of the trade deadline than sometimes is warranted. I think, some teams made big splashes and it helped. Josh Naylor was certainly helpful to the Mariners, and some teams did big splashes and it didn't do any good at all. They still ended up the same place the Tigers or didn't even make the playoffs. I think what fans want to see is they want to see you try and you want to, go for it, right? With big moves. And a lot of the kind of people in my circle were picking out that talk about, hey, somebody we could have traded. It would have required someone we didn't trade who ended up pitching better or performing better. And it was like, okay, so you're talking about Troy Melton. And some people thought it was, Suarez. I was thinking maybe Helsley as a guy because he required 2 decent prospects, I think, from the Mets, as I recall. But, it's looking back on trade deadlines is always like, you could pick anything. It's kind of like looking back at the draft. You're like, oh, the Tigers should have taken Mookie Betts here instead of Brandon Loy. Well, of course, yeah, you see that now. They didn't see it at the time. But, so at the same time, I got to give credit to my buddy, Brandon Day from Bless You Boys. He said, Harris is kind of talking out on both sides of his mouth here, though. If you're boasting about having one of the best farm systems in baseball, then you should be able to make these moves or solid moves without having to part with your top 5, 100 prospects or your top starting pitching prospect in Troy Melton.
Unless other teams don't value the Tigers' farm system as highly as the Tigers value their farm system.
Yeah. And part of that could be it's a top heavy farm system too. So, it's ranked highly because they have these 4 or 5 guys who are all top 50 prospects. But then after that, it thins out or flattens really quickly. They're, rankings are rankings. And I think if you looked at another team's actual kind of preference board, as it were, I bet you Troy Melton's a lot higher on a lot of those boards than he was on any prospect ranking site. That's just, teams do a better job of scouting. But, I think there's no way you didn't make it. You didn't win the World Series. You didn't get to the ALCS. So there's no way you can really talk about what you did at the trade deadline without it sounding like excuses. They didn't get the job done. And, so you're kind of having to prevaricate a little bit, but, I don't take a whole lot away from it.
Here's what Scott Harris and AJ Hinch said about the offense, specifically pertaining to how the Tigers plan to unlock more contact and less whiffs from their hitters.
Scott, kind of off that, you talked about the need to reshape the lineup a little bit with more contact, less swing and miss. When you have a young core and some of those prospects that likely won't be ready by 2026, where does that start?
Yeah, so I think it starts in a few ways. One thing that I noticed with our team is we started to get a little bit more pitchable late in the season. Some of our contact issues and approach issues started to get exposed in September. Some of the things that I saw were we started to get a little bit pull happy towards the end of the year. I think that created some holes for us that got exploited in the playoffs. I think sometimes we started to audible off the game plan a little bit quicker in at bats. We started to audible towards an approach that tried to cover every pitch type in every location. That's really hard to do at this level. And I think that some of the interaction between approach and contact really started to hurt us. So the pitches we were swinging were exacerbating our contact issues. I think a lot of that is going to improve through the experience that these guys had. Like it or not, it was hard to watch in September. I fully admit it. I felt that too. These guys are going to be better off for it. They went through some deep struggles in September and they came out the other side getting really hot in the playoffs, going into Cleveland, winning a really important series, and then taking Seattle to the brink in 15 innings. That experience and reflecting on the things that, you pay the power bill? Reflecting on the things that went well and help them get out of those struggles will help them. This team is going to show up in Lakeland and they're going to be more battle tested. That's 2 straight years in the postseason, and they've seen high-end pitching. They've seen what works against high-end pitching and what doesn't. So some of that's going to be through approach development this offseason that we're already working on. Some of that is going to be through some bat path work with our hitting coaches. I think some of the paths on our team started to change late in the year. I think that started to create some of the issues that we had through the year. I think there's still some work that we can do this offseason in facilities here when they come here, and then also in Lakeland to fix some path issues. And then the last part is through the additions that we are going to add internally. Some of the players are not going to be ready for 26, but a lot of them are going to be ready for 26. And so when we add some of those players with the skills, traits, and attributes that we have been prioritizing through the draft and development, I think those are the 3 main areas that we're going to be able to improve both our approach and contact issues that I outlined.
AJ, I'm curious, everything that he's saying, how is that from your point of view? Like, do you have to meet with your hitting group? Do you have to refashion your hitting group? Or what does those changes look like from you?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked, because I have a lot of thoughts on the offensive side of the game in this era has never been harder. What is required out of a major league hitter is it's only getting harder and harder. Velocity up, movement, pitch shapes. The pitching laboratories are much further along than the reaction side of the sport as an offensive player. And so it's constantly, the challenge is getting tougher and tougher. And I watch all these games, and I watch a high contact team like the Cubs get 6 base runners against the Brewers as they were going through their own version of pitching chaos and pitching somebody different every other inning. Or I see, last night in the game, the Blue Jays high powered offense scored a bazillion runs in the ALDS, not be able to push a run across after the first swing of the night. Against a pitcher on short rest who's on the back end of a rotation, albeit a really, really talented rotation. So it's not an excuse as much as it's perspective. And I think I've spent the last couple of days, in my office and players filtering through there and packing up lockers and saying goodbye. And I asked Carp, what's the difference between, September for him and a dominant October where he was in control of all of his bats and getting, hitting the ball out of the ballpark, getting intentionally walked, mixing in a few hits, drawing a few walks. And it all centers around getting a good pitch to hit. I know that's a comment that I've said over and over and over again, and it's way easier said than done. But pitch recognition and choosing, when to be aggressive, when to be patient against each pitcher is paramount. Over 162, it's agonizing, because there's going to be peaks and valleys in everybody's year. And so we're going to continue to push our players to have an audible with the swing, where it's not always just trying to chase the pull side power, although pull side air is getting rewarded more and more and more in our game, both in winning, and in earning potential. So playing the game seems to get exposed as you get deeper into the season and you get into playoff baseball and you see things that you don't see over the course of 162. How much of that can we bring, sort of into our every day is going to be important. So we're going to look at our messaging. We're going to look at our prep. We're going to look at our game planning. How are we implementing it? Who is implementing it? All the above, because it's, you got to be good at everything. So it's not pointing the finger at offense. It's not pointing the finger at defense. It's not pointing the finger at pitching. To be an elite team, and we were one of the elite teams, to be an elite team, you have to do it all, and you need it all. So I can't only focus this winter on contact. That's not going to get us where we want to get to, because somewhere we have other areas to get better at, but we are not going to be naive and think that we're going to run it back and do this again. Like one of the reasons I had such a hard time at the podium after Game 5 is like, it's hard to get to where we're at. It's hard to get to run the whole race and get through the season and have 87 wins be disappointing. Like that's hard, to have a series win in the wild card. Like we're not going to think it's not good enough. We won the series and against a really good team. And then we get to 15 innings, one more run or one more pitch or one more defensive play. And it feels like we would be, reviewing Game 1 decisions and Game 1, offense, defense, base running, things like that. And instead we're sitting at this podium. So it's, I have great appreciation for everything that we did, but we are not going to be, we want more. And we know that we can do more and achieve, higher bars. And I'm glad that to some extent that I'm sitting here, talking about all of that not being good enough. Like what a great accomplishment for us just to reset the bar as to where we're at and know that this city, this fan base, this organization, these players, these coaches can do more. And we're gonna work tirelessly to do it. We're gonna take a couple of days off, but we are going to get back up at it and try to run that same race and be however many wins more it takes to win this division, to advance past the ALDS and bring a World Series to Detroit.
So that was Scott Harris and AJ Hinch talking about the offense. It seemed like Scott Harris was pointing the finger at the offense, and AJ Hinch said, hey, no finger pointing. Obviously, the pitching is to blame, both the starting rotation and the bullpen. They were not without fault, those two areas of the Tigers team. Obviously, a lot of it did come down to the offense, especially with runners in scoring position down the stretch. There were many opportunities. I think that's where I struggled the most with what went wrong with this team was the Tigers had opportunities to score. It's not like they didn't have any opportunities. It's not like we got to the end of the game and it was like, oh, they were like 0 for 1 with runners in scoring position and they never had any chance. Like, no, like they had opportunities over and over again. And so to me, that tells me that the approach is good enough to get guys on base. The quality of the at-bat is good enough to get guys on base. And don't get me wrong, the Tigers are one of the worst teams in baseball when it comes to strikeout rate. And they were only about average in the walk rate department. So when you're one of the worst in baseball when it comes to strikeouts, and you're only about average when it comes to walks, that's not always a recipe for success when it comes to Is it a good at bat or is it a bad at bat, right? When it comes to, are you making good swing decisions or are you not making good swing decisions? And then you go look at what they did. And when they had their highest batting average, when they had their highest slugging percentage, it was in June when their strikeout rate was at 21%. And then you look at what they did in September. Strikeout rate was at 26%. And their batting average was the lowest that it was all year. And their slugging percentage was the lowest that it was all year. So fewer strikeouts, better results. More strikeouts, worse results. That's kind of the narrative of the Tigers season, specifically at the plate. I do think it's important for them to put the ball in play more often, to make better swing decisions, to cut down on the swing and miss, move the ball forward. Those are all important things. But I think it's a little bit unfair to act like they didn't do that at all. I think it's unfair to act like they didn't move the ball forward, didn't draw walks, didn't swing at good pitches. Like there were stretches of the season where the Tigers did a good job of those things and they were rewarded for it in the results. However, when it came down to crunch time and there were the big moments and we were in September and going into October, somehow they were able to put runners on base and then suddenly couldn't drive them in. Like, is that a bad approach or is that just you're not clutch in the hitting department? What are your thoughts on that? And then kind of walk me through what you heard from Scott Harris and from AJ Hinch.
Yeah, well, I mean, earlier, I think Scott Harris seemed just as perplexed as anybody else about what happened to the offense. Like, why did a top 8 offense turn into a bottom 8 offense? And he did talk a little bit about, some swing path stuff. That felt almost directly at Riley Green to me. And, Riley Green still had a very good year. What happened with Riley Green is he traded 4% of his walk rate last year for 4% more strikeouts this year, got 12 more home runs out of it. You'd like to see kind of a happy median somewhere there. But yeah, I think, it really is kind of mystifying why they couldn't get those hits when they needed them the most. It was kind of, if you were watching the press conference or if you were there, when they were talking about that, the power went out or the lights went off, which was kind of one of those like weird, like apropos moments, like, oh, it's a power outage, just like the offense. But yeah, I agree with you. Like the offense was giving itself chances for the most part, but there are parts of that, the way they've done it, where you're setting yourself up a little bit for failure if you're going to be such a high strikeout team. And there were times when it wasn't a strikeout. It was Javi Baez came up and hit a weak grounder to third instead of hitting, any number of other balls in play that could have resulted in a run. It was Gleyber Torres. I thought for sure when he was up with the bases loaded, he was just going to do like a patented line drive to right center. And I think he flew out. It's just, baseball is very hard and hitting is very hard. And I think Hinch made that pretty clear. But it's comforting in some ways to know that they were just as confused about it as everybody else. But I also take a little bit of solace knowing that they have some ideas of how they can make it better. But we'll see if they can actually implement that and head into next year.
Yeah, the implementation of it is kind of what gets me because you're right. I mean, they did strike out a lot and that was a trend throughout the entire season. Obviously, some months more than other months, but at the same time, they were a high strikeout team, but they were a good offense for most of the season. And then, like I said, down the stretch, they really struggled. Is that just happenstance? Like maybe that's just happenstance. And you don't want to overreact too much to one thing. You talk about changing bat paths and stuff like that. Like, is that the best thing? Like maybe it's good to change Riley Green's bat path a little bit, but like to go and have like Kerry Carpenter needs to swing the bat differently. Riley Green needs to swing it differently. Spencer Torkelson needs to swing it differently. Parker, could that almost do more harm than help? Is that overreacting to a month and a half sample size when you have to look back and say, okay, this team was good for like 4.5 to 5 months? I mean, and then you look at the personnel, right? Like Kerry Carpenter is going to be here. Colt Keith is going to be here. Riley Green is going to be here. Spencer Torkelson is going to be here. Like Zach McKinstry, he should be here. Dylan Dingler will be here. Parker Meadows, he should be here. Who else is playing center field? Javier Baez, he's going to be here. So when you look at the lineup, Wenzel Perez, going to be here. Like obviously the Tigers could make some moves and trades could happen, but unless they deviate from what they've done in the past, I don't foresee any of those guys not being on the roster next year. And they talk a lot about being able to develop from within, continue to get guys better, help them improve. Those guys are all coming back. So, I mean, is it Kevin McGonigal to save the day and put the ball in play more often? Is that what it's going to come down to? Or are we going to try to overhaul swings? That's what I'm curious to see. Okay, as this goes along, what actually happens to implement these changes? And in some ways, I worry that maybe the implementation of certain things could be an overreaction. You could ultimately end up hurting this group more than you actually help this group.
That's certainly possible. You don't want to, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But, they headed into the last offseason, Colt Keith was moved to first base because Spencer Torkelson was basically on the outs, right? And they helped him overhaul his swing a little bit. And he's still Spencer Torkelson. He's not, a world beater, but he hit 30 plus home runs again. So they were able to fix some things there. If they can, make the proper adjustments adjustments and help these guys just stay more consistent. I think you're a golfer, right? The baseball, it's swinging a bat is a rotational athleticism, and that there are a lot of things that can go wrong when you're doing that. Just minor things can dip your shoulder like an inch over the course of a season, and your bat path gets too steep, or little minor injuries or major injuries like a sports hernia or whatever. Like, they can really affect the way you're swinging. And when they talked about the press conference, I don't think we had it in that clip, but it was a lot about, for AJ Hinch, he keeps talking about it's about pitch selection. Like, he basically said, I don't care that much if they swing at pitches in the zone and they miss them. It's hard, but it's when they're swinging at the wrong pitches that he wants to work on. And part of that is not really mechanical. It's, mental.
It's get a good pitch to hit. That has been his mantra year over year over year, especially to Riley Green. So you got to get a good pitch to hit. And that's where it starts.
Yeah. And, and again, we talk about that home run he hit the home run off Spire too. That would have been very memorable had the Tigers been able to pull out the series, but now it's lost to the dustbin of history.
Here's what Scott Harris said about Tarik Skubal, who is set to become a free agent after the 2026 season and projects to become the first MLB pitcher to secure a $400 million contract once he gets into free agency.
Tarik is obviously going into the final year of his controllability. How much of a decision point is that this offseason? Or are you are you kind of prepared to go into the season with him and see how it rolls that way?
Yeah, listen, I totally understand the question, and I understand that you have to ask me. I've kind of learned over time, especially with this question, that general comments tend to get chopped up and forced into narratives. I can't comment on our players being traded. I can't comment on free agents, and I can't comment on other teams' players. So I'm going to respond by just not actually commenting on it. Tarik is a Tiger. I hope he wins the Cy Young for the second consecutive year. He's an incredible pitcher, and we're lucky to have him. That's all I can say on that.
Will ownership give you what it takes to sign Tarik Skubal long term?
Chris has been supportive with everything we want to do. It was one of the key questions that I had when I interviewed for this job and considered leaving the Giants to come to this job. I know that Chris is going to support us with everything we need, both in terms of, player payroll, but also non-player payroll, all of the infrastructure investments, all the investments in key staff members that can help us bring a World Series here. So I have no concerns about that.
Question for Scott on Tarik Skubal. I know you didn't want to talk too much about his immediate future, but looking back at what he's done, you guys got to the ALDS Game 5, back-to-back seasons. Do you think you could have gotten there without him? And then looking ahead, whether it's 2026 or 2027 and beyond, do you think you can get back to that point without Skubal?
Listen, that's a really difficult question to answer because it's a total hypothetical. He's the best pitcher in baseball. Like, he's going to hopefully win a second Cy Young. Like, it would be arrogant and tone deaf for me to claim that we could do all this stuff without him. But on the other hand, it's also offensive to the other players in the clubhouse to treat us as like a one-player team. So the fact is, we've had Tarik, and he's made incredible contributions for the duration of his tenure with the Tigers, but especially the last 2 years, he's gotten a lot better, and he's pitched huge games for us. And this guy's done a really good job of keeping him healthy and performing at a really high level with how he has managed him early in the season. He's been a huge part of what we've done here, and it's a blast to watch him pitch. I don't really think I can engage in hypotheticals of what would happen in past years if he wasn't here, and what would happen if he's not here in the future. Like, he's here, and we're glad he's here.
That was Scott Harris talking about Tarik Skubal. Of course, that's the big question, and it's going to be the big question all offseason. What do? Do you trade Tarik Skubal, or do you keep Tarik Skubal? After Game 5 of the ALDS, it was interesting. Tarik Skubal said that he wouldn't talk to the front office about his future or the direction of the organization. Essentially said, hey, my job is to play. Anything else outside of that, like, that's up to the front office. If anybody else wants to ask those questions, like, direct them to the front office, like, don't direct them to me. I'm just going to pitch, and that's what I'm going to do. I thought that was an interesting way of going about it, as opposed to saying, hey, I want to sit down and talk about my future. Tarik Skubal was very much like, hey, I'm just going to pitch, and then whatever happens, happens. Also, owner Christopher Ilitch, I asked him after Game 3 of the AL wildcard, I asked him if he was prioritizing a Tarik Skubal extension, and he said, quote, we're in 2025 right now. end quote. That was Christopher Ilitch's quote when I asked if it was a priority to give Tarik Skubal a contract extension to keep him beyond the 2026 season. Chris Ilitch deferred to the fact that it is 2025 right now. So that's where the Tigers are at. When you talk about Scott Harris, Christopher Ilitch, Tarik Skubal, that's what all three of those voices are having to say right now. Reading between the lines, Chris, what are some of your thoughts on the Skubal situation, what Scott Harris had to say, what Christopher Ilitch has said, what Tarik Skubal has said? And look, don't get me wrong, Tigers in 2024 and 2025, in Tarik Skubal starts, it is a 42-20 record. In non-Tarik Skubal starts, it is a 131-131 record. So a 500 record in non-Skubal starts. And in Skubal starts, when Tarik Skubal takes the ball to start the game, the Tigers are 42-20. So it's obviously a significant boost when Tarik Skubal is on the mound for this team. But what are your thoughts about everything?
Yeah, it's the tough question because you guys have to ask it, because the fans want to know about it. And Scott Harris is not going to say anything. Chris Ilitch is not going to say anything. Tarik Skubal is not going to say anything. Scott Morris isn't going to say anything. Like, nobody involved is going to say anything, because whatever they say could only hurt them, really. They say, oh, we love Skubal, we love to have him back. Well, okay, it's the price just went up. Realistically, it's going to be super expensive no matter what. And, Scott Harris, the way he says it, he says, I can't comment on that. He makes it sound like he's not allowed to, which is technically true.
He is allowed. No, he's allowed to. He could comment all he wants.
So there are some rules about what you could say about free agents, but Skubal's not a free agent. You could talk about trades, I think, if you want. You could talk about pre-arb players, I think, if you want. The rule there is that nothing you say about the player can then be used against you in an arbitration hearing. So you say, oh, he's the best pitcher of all time. They're not going to come back and say, oh, you said this. It's going to cost you more. But he can. He's choosing not to. It's like me telling my son that we can't go to the store to get candy, right? Like, we can. We're not gonna. So that's what he means by that. But I will say, and I'm not a reporter. I don't usually have sources or whatever, but I do have somebody I trust really closely who's got a source from inside the locker room who says that Skubal does like the Tigers, would like to stay, but Scott Morris won't let him sign for anything under highest paid player in baseball. That was the quote. And I don't know if that means highest paid pitcher or if he wants Juan Soto money to avoid going to free agency. That would seem like a bit much. Either way, you're talking $350, $400 million. As you said, it could be the first $400 million pitcher. It's just, how much do you value your guy, the guy who came here and did all this for you in Detroit? How much does that, and there's huge value to fans for sure, right? And he's our guy. We want him to stay here forever. It's not a smart signing for multiple reasons. We saw what happened with the end of Miguel Guerrero's career. Skubal's going to get 8-10 years at like $350 to $400 million probably. It would be nice that he never played in another uniform, but I don't think the Tigers are going to wade into that pool. And that's why we were talking about earlier. It's like, well, do you trade him then? All that comes into play after that, because it's such a large amount of money and it's going to pay off in the short term probably. And then there's a complicating factor with him with the multiple injuries on his arm, but it's just not the sort of thing that I picture Scott Harris wanting to do. And I think that Chris Ilitch is kind of a hands-off owner in that regard. He's not Mike Ilitch. He's not going to tell him to go sign him no matter what it costs. And so I don't think Scott Harris wants to sign him for, $400 million. And so I don't think it's going to happen.
And we talked about that a few episodes ago when it came to, who deserved blame for what happened to the Tigers down the stretch. And it was, if Chris Ilitch was a more hands-on owner, they would have had Alex Bregman. Maybe they would be extending Tarik Skubal. But Christopher Ilitch, as far as we understand, based on track record, history, he has no problem funding everything the Tigers want to do. Infrastructure. I mean, he's great. He is all in on what the Tigers are trying to do in that department. When it comes to player contracts and deals, he is not involved from everything that we understand. So if he wanted to get involved and he wanted to get Alex Bregman, would have been a Tiger. If he wanted Tarik Skubal to be a Tiger for life, Tarik Skubal would be a Tiger for life. That ultimately falls on the shoulders of Christopher Ilitch, maybe not so much Scott Harris. You mentioned your guy, and I'm talking about Scott Harris. Scott Harris's guy. Here's what he said about number one prospect, Kevin McGonigal, who, I didn't say this outright, but he pretty much danced around it, will be invited to MLB spring training and is expected to make his MLB debut at some point in the 2026 season. Here's Scott Harris on Kevin McGonigal.
To follow up on that, he mentioned McGonigal. I mean, you talked about the top prospects being closer. How realistic is it a guy like him is in Detroit this spring? And I guess to Will's question too, does that affect free agent decisions this winter for you? The prospect of those guys being here soon?
Yeah. So I expect the players that posted dominant years in AA to factor into our big league team next year. They've earned it. They posted incredible years as 20-year-olds, very young for level. I expect their progress to continue, and I expect them to be in Detroit at some point next year. Does that affect what we do this winter? Absolutely. How could it not? I mean, these guys are really exciting young players that can help us on both sides of the ball, and we got to make sure that we are preserving opportunity for them. We also have to compete. The expectations have changed around here. We have to thread that needle whereby we are putting ourselves in a really good position to get off to a good start, but also add to that team throughout the summer internally with some of these players that are coming. You know, Kevin is in the fall league right now. He's playing some shortstop. He's playing some third base. He has played second, short, and now he's going to have experience at third base. I'm not going to announce that he's going to be in Major League camp because I should probably tell him before I announce it. But I think a lot of these guys are going to be in Major League camp. You're going to see them firsthand. And more importantly, they're going to get a lot of experience being around the big league coaches and the big league players so that when they ultimately get to the big leagues, they're more comfortable and we have an environment ready for them that allows them to jump onto this team and make this team better immediately. I will say the only other thing is they've already affected what we've done up to this point, because how could they not? Like we have invested so much in a lot of these players, and we want to create opportunity for them to come here and get better, just like we've done with guys like Dylan Dingler, like creating opportunity for them to like ultimately get on this team and then demonstrate they can be one of the better catchers in all of baseball. Like we got to continue to create runway for these players because our future, it's too important to our future. We are in a position right now where the present is really bright and the future is really bright, and we got to preserve that no matter what we do this winter.
That's Scott Harris on Kevin McGonigal, as well as some of the offseason plans, with Kevin McGonigal obviously factoring into those offseason plans. Chris Brown, you are Tigers minor league report. You've seen more Kevin McGonigal ABs than I have. So break it down. I mean, Kevin McGonigal going to be in MLB spring training. Does he deserve an opportunity to be on the 2026 opening day roster? Do you think he is on the 2026 opening day roster? If not, how soon until he's called up? And then how much of an impact do you think he can really make in year one? Because for as good as we've seen players perform in the minor leagues, there is still an adjustment period when they get to the big leagues. We saw it with Colt Keith. We've seen it with Spencer Torkelson, with Riley Green. You go look at what Kevin McGonigal has done at the AA level. Kevin McGonigal in 46 games in AA, he's hit 254. Riley Green in 84 games at the AA level, he hit 298. So Riley Green hit near 300 at AA. Kevin McGonigal hitting right around 250 at AA. So Riley Green, more hits than Kevin McGonigal at the AA level. Obviously, McGonigal is more of an on-base threat, draws more walks, limits the strikeouts. Riley Green, more of a free swinger. But I think it's made out to be like, Kevin McGonigal is a better prospect than Riley Green was when Riley Green was coming through the system. I don't know if that's entirely true when you dig into the numbers. I think maybe we see more of the positive performance on social media than the negative performance. Like we don't see when Kevin McGonigal grounds out, right? We don't see when he pops out or flies out. We see the home runs, we see the singles, we see the clutch hits in the big moments. But at the same time, Kevin McGonigal hitting just 254 in 46 games for AA Erie, whereas Riley Green hit nearly 384 games for AA Erie. So walk me through some of that, right? Big league camp, opening day roster, if not, when, and then how much of an impact can Kevin McGonigal really have on the Tigers offense in 2026? Do you throw all your eggs in the Kevin McGonigal basket? Or maybe do you think about a couple of plan B, plan C, and maybe even plan D?
Shout out to Rogelio Castillo, Tigers minor league report too, for doing that too. And yes, maybe we are slightly responsible for elevating a little bit of the expectations for Kevin McGonigal. I will say, and he's talked about this, is he started getting fed a ton of breaking balls and changeups. He destroys fastballs. like a lot of hitters. And he's very good at hitting everything, but AA pitchers just started throwing him tons of junk. And what resulted in that, his batting average on balls in play was like 230, which is, traditionally it's going to be closer to 300. That indicates a little bit of bad luck, but part of it was him trying to figure out what to do with these, slow breaking balls away. And sometimes he would punch them the other way, but a lot of times he was rolling over on the ground, partly because he worked on his swing and his bat speed this year to get more power and more pull power. And that was, great results there. But so he just has to make some more adjustments, and that's going to happen again at the big league level. As to whether he's going to make the roster out of spring training, I think he will be given every chance to. I suspect that, he's going to be starting at either second base or third base on opening day next year. If he doesn't have a good spring, they may look to one of the other guys in the system who kind of play those positions. Max Anderson, How You Lead, they're not necessarily as highly touted. Well, certainly not as highly touted, but they're there, and they could play that for a little bit until McGonigal is ready. Now, if they go out and get Alex Bregman, then that's not going to happen. But McGonigal can also play shortstop. So maybe he displaces Trey Sweeney in some regard. And maybe Javi Baez is playing more center again. I think that he's going to make his way onto the major league roster relatively quickly. I can't guarantee that's going to be on opening day, but I think they would like for him to be there on opening day because of, even if he's not necessarily hitting, as you said, hitting 250 in AA, he was hitting for plenty of power, was getting on base a ton. His defense is a work in progress, but he can add value with defense and with speed. There's a lot to like there that he can help, even if he's trying to figure out the hitting. And, the other guys they're mentioning at AA, he's, Max Clark is another one of the 20-year-olds, and he's not considered maybe like quite as ready as McGonigal, but he'll be up in the big leagues next year too, I think, because he's getting close. Josue Briseño, another 20-year-old, first baseman catcher. He struggled a little bit more than those other two. Part of that, I think, is he was just playing a lot of games for the first time in his career. And he basically was catching every game down the stretch. And he's not, I don't think he's a catcher in the big leagues. If he could be, even for 25, 30 games a year, that'd be super valuable. He's got a lot of work to do. It takes a long time to learn how to be a good defensive catcher. And it's a very demanding position. So his offense dipped a little bit, but he's another guy with a really good eye, with a lot of power, good hitter. So these are three guys who can come up and help next year. I think it would be kind of foolish to expect all of them to come up and immediately be good. And as you were saying, there's a huge adjustment period in the big leagues. And we saw it with Parker Meadows. We saw it with Colt Keith. We've seen it with Riley Green and Spencer Torkelson. Nick Kurtz, who's going to win the American League Rookie of the Year. He had a bad first 5 or 6 weeks. It takes time. But the one thing I feel pretty confident about Kevin McGonigal is he's going to figure it out and become a very good offensive player, in relatively short order.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, we are going to touch on a couple of other things, and then we're going to get out of here. We're back. Let's dive right into AJ Hinch. He receives a contract extension from the Tigers. That happened at some point during the 2025 season. We know he was hired by Al Avila in October 2020. He was extended by Scott Harris in October 2023, then again in the summer of 2025. And the Tigers had never shared any of the contract details. This is probably more about money than years at this point. But I do wonder if AJ Hinch is under contract for more years than Scott Harris. Like, wouldn't that be interesting? And obviously, maybe a little bit of a bad look for Scott Harris. If that's the case, if AJ Hinch is under contract for longer than Scott Harris, then it would tell me that Chris Ilitch trusts AJ Hinch more than he trusts Scott Harris when it comes to the future of the organization. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if that's how Chris Ilitch feels. When you ask Chris Ilitch about AJ Hinch, he just glows. He just lights up. I mean, not that he doesn't light up about Scott Harris, but it's just a little bit different when he talks about AJ Hinch and what a great manager he is. So anyway, I think this is probably more about the money than the years with this extension. The reason why AJ Hinch was extended in October of 2023. And then we see Craig Counsell. He becomes the manager of the Cubs. He sets the market at 5 years, worth more than $40 million. It made him the highest paid manager in MLB history, both in terms of average annual value and total value. So we know AJ Hinch wasn't making $8 million per year like Craig Counsell before the 2025 season. But now with this new contract, maybe AJ Hinch is making more than $8 million per year. Maybe he has surpassed Craig Counsell. Maybe AJ Hinch has the new record for highest paid manager in MLB history based on this new contract extension. So that's why I guess this is probably more about money than it is years, maybe a year tacked on, because he just just had a contract extension. So why would you need another contract extension? Like if you were already locked up long-term, which AJ Hinch was locked up long-term, like why do you need more years on top of long-term? I think it just has to do more with money because of the way that we've seen Craig Counsell get paid, the way that we've seen Alex Cora get paid. I think it's only right that AJ Hinch gets paid what he deserves for being the best manager in baseball. If AJ Hinch is getting paid like Craig Counsell, let's say that he is getting paid somewhere around $8 million per year like Counsell, you think that's justified considering what we've seen from AJ Hinch, the way that he is able to do what he's able to do with the roster that he's given? I think it's easy to forget, like this Tigers team is nothing like the AJ Hinch Houston Astros team. I mean, AJ Hinch, what he has to do specifically on the offensive side, the position player side, to get the most out of this group. I mean, it's almost like magic watching him go out there and work, night in and night out. So I think he definitely deserves every million that he's getting just because of what he has to do and put up. I mean, it is not a lock it in and go type of a lineup. It is definitely a plug and play, mix and match, and he does it as well as anybody in baseball.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about kind of our respect for AJ Hinch and how he does it. I think he is probably the best manager in baseball in terms of both the way he manages the clubhouse and the strategic aspect of the game. And if I mean, it's kind of like in college football, right? Whenever Nick Saban, before he retired, if he's getting paid $10 million a year, then somebody else has to be, now Urban Meyer's got $11 million, and now, Nick Saban's got to get 12. Like and it doesn't help to put it out in public. I guess I understand why the Tigers do it. It would be helpful for people who care about this sort of thing, but then all it does is go, people complain about him making too much money. But yeah, I can just go pure sabermetric nerd aspect of it. The traditional thinking is that, the cost for a win above replacement is somewhere between like $8 and $10 million a year. And so if you think AJ Hinch is worth one win to your team, then he's worth $8 million. I think he's probably worth more than that. I don't know if it's more than 3 or 4. It's tough for a manager to like, huge difference like that. But I don't know. I rarely feel like AJ Hinch gets outmaneuvered, very rarely. And so I think he's adding a lot of value to the team on the field and behind the scenes.
All right, before we get out of here, because it is time to get out of here, what is the biggest need for the Tigers in the offseason?
Yeah, I mean, we touched on it. I think they need some more contact skills. It'd be nice to have a veteran hitter, maybe a Bo Bichette, maybe an Alex Bregman. But I think another big need, we kind of touched on, it would be nice if they had another solid starting pitcher who could give them, length in the playoffs. Somebody who's that good. A number 2 for real. That's, again, it might be wishing for too much and they have some other pitchers available, but I think those are the 2 biggest needs. And then followed up with some more swing and miss in the bullpen.
For me, it's all Alex Bregman. He's got 2 years remaining on his 3-year, $120 million contract with the Boston Red Sox. He can opt out of his contract. Now, we probably won't know his decision until 5 days after the end of the World Series, which is when the option decisions are due. He has a player option, so he gets to decide if he wants to opt out of the contract. I'm expecting Alex Bregman to opt out in pursuit of a long-term contract. Now, it is 2 years, $80 million remaining on that Red Sox contract. And yes, a lot of that is deferred, but either way, he's not going to get $40 million per year elsewhere, but he could get more total value over more years elsewhere, which is what I think he wants. So I think there's a chance that Bregman restructures his deal with the Red Sox. If not, then it's going to be Red Sox, Tigers, Cubs, Dodgers, Mariners, among other teams going after Alex Bregman in free agency. The Tigers missed out last offseason. I really think that cost them this year. When it really look back at what went wrong for the Tigers, I think it all starts with Alex Bregman and it ends with Alex Bregman. Like they missed out on a middle of the order bat, a stable presence at third base, and a leader in the clubhouse. And Alex Bregman was right there for them last offseason, but the Tigers chose not to sign him. The Tigers offered Bregman 6 years, $171.5 million with an opt-out clause after the 2026 season. Meanwhile, Alex Bregman made 2 offers to the Tigers, 7 years, $200 million, 6 years, $186 million with an opt-out clause after the 2025 season. The Tigers turned down both of those offers. The Tigers could have accepted and signed Bregman, but the Tigers declined Alex Bregman. And then Alex Bregman picked the Red Sox offer instead of the Tigers offer. The Tigers cannot miss out on Alex Bregman this time around. If they're serious about winning the World Series in 2026, regardless of what happens with Tarik Skubal, I think you have to go after Alex Bregman and you have to get it done this time. And if it takes Chris Ilitch to come in and get involved in negotiations, then that's on Chris Ilitch to get involved this time and make something happen, because I just don't think the Tigers can miss out on Alex Bregman again. All right, let's get out of here. Thanks to Chris Brown from Tigers Minor League Report for co-hosting with me this week. Thanks to everyone out there for listening. to the latest episode of Days of Roar. And look, this show went through a lot of changes over this past season. Thank you all for sticking with us and listening week in and week out. Please like, rate, share, and subscribe. Drop us a rating and comment what you think about the show. Stick with freak.com/sports for the latest Tigers coverage. I'd like to thank the editor of the Free Press, Nicole Avery Nichols, sports editor Bill Bradley, and our magical producer, Robin Shan. Robin, thank you so much for cutting up this episode, our longest episode we've ever done. There was a lot to discuss and there was a lot to dig into, and you're the reason why we're able to do it all. So hat tip to you, Robin. For the Detroit Free Press, I'm Evan Petzold. We will catch you next week. Until then, go in peace.